Hey, it's Matt at RuffHouse Studios, and welcome to Cannabasics. Today we're taking ordinary box brownie mix and turning it into espresso hazelnut cannabis-infused brownies. This episode is brought to you by Infused Eats. Infused Eats is our official website for all of our infused recipes. You'll find this and dozens more cannabis-infused recipes at infusedeats.com. Now, the point of today's recipe is to make a really simple brownie recipe. We're going to be using canna butter that we've already made. You can use canna butter that you've made in any of the methods that we've shown you before. You could also use infused vegetable oil. But moving ahead with the recipe, this is what you're going to need. You're going to need a half a cup of infused butter or oil. You're going to need a cup of hazelnuts, and you could also use a different kind of nut if you want there. You need a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt or regular salt, a half a cup of coffee beans. Use a good quality bean. 1 egg for regular brownies, chewy brownies, and 2 for cake-like brownies. We need 1 box of brownie mix, and that kind of brownie mix is up to you. I'm using a Duncan Hines double fudge. And then you need 1 tub of cream cheese icing. And again, you can vary up the icing if you want, but this recipe calls for cream cheese. The first step is going to be to prepare the nuts. And to do that, we're going to be using the same 9x9 pan that we're going to cook the brownies in. We're also preparing the pan in this case. So we're going to take the 2 tablespoons of canna butter and put that into the pan, and then add in the hazelnuts, and then a generous amount of sea salt or salt sprinkled on top there, and then roll the nuts around a little bit so they get coated in the canna butter, and the salt gets distributed, and they look like that. Now we're going to put those in an oven that's been preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to let those toast off for 10 to 12 minutes until they're nice and toasted brown. Now be careful, there's a very fine line between nice and toasted brown like this and burnt to a crisp. And we want the toasted flavor, the little bit of bitterness that toasted will bring, but not too much, so be careful to watch them. It's a really fine line. So now we're going to take about a 1/4 cup of the hazelnuts and separate them out, and then leave the remaining nuts in the pan, and then just use the butt of the knife to crack them open, and just barely crack them open one time. And then the nuts that you separated out, we're going to use a knife and then chop those fine, because we're going to put those as a topping on top of the icing. Now we're going to move on to prepping the coffee or espresso. If you have an espresso maker, then go ahead and make about a half a cup of really strong espresso. Otherwise, you can do what I'm doing here, putting the coffee beans, this is about 1/3 cup or so, into a coffee grinder and just grind them until they're almost powdered. And then I just have it a pour over coffee filter here, and I'm using hot water. Just boil the water and then let it cool off just a little bit so it's nearly boiling, and then pour it over the beans. So really, really hot. And you can let that go through one time. And then to make it extra strong, what I would like to do there is to take the coffee that's already gone through once, instead of adding more fresh water, use the same coffee. So you can see now I'm pouring out the strong coffee that's already in the bottom of the pan there. And it's still really hot because I've done this really quickly. And you could heat that back up again if you want to make sure it's extra hot, but then pour it back over for a second pour through the beans. And that's going to give you a little strong coffee, which is basically what we want. We're not using very much of it, so we want it to be an intense flavor. Okay, so now we have our preparation done, and we're going to move ahead and along now. And now this is where you can basically vary your recipe depending on your box. So if your box brownie calls for a half a cup or 1/3 cup, or whatever amounts that you use there, you're going to replace the water with the coffee. You're going to replace the oil with the melted canna butter. And then you're basically going to follow the recipe, the rest, whatever the box says. And so now I've added in the egg because I like my brownies chewy. I've added in the extra fudge that was in this Duncan Hines mix. And I wouldn't use a mix that has like caramel or something you add on the top. But, if you have like extra chunk brownies or the extra chocolate chips or something, that's great. So use whatever kind of mix you want. I like to stick with the chocolate when I'm using hazelnut and espresso though. Now we have our brownie batter mixed up according to the package directions. We're moving ahead along, and I'm just spraying the sides of that pan that has the remaining canna butter and those hazelnuts in it. Just to make sure it doesn't stick to the sides, just spray the sides of the pan. But you have plenty of canna butter, should have, in the pan with the hazelnuts there. And then being very gentle with the batter, pour it over the hazelnuts. And the idea here is not to mix the nuts in, but to try it as your best to leave them on the bottom. So they're kind of almost like making a little crusty bottom with the hazelnuts on the bottom. And then smooth the batter out on top. And then look at there, we're ready for the oven. So So we're going to bake these again at 350, 30 to 35 minutes, or until a toothpick in the center comes out, or according to your package directions. So basically on these, I cooked them to the package directions. They came out just perfect. And now we have brownies now. They're already espresso hazelnut brownies. If you just wanted to skip ahead to eating now, you could totally do that. But we're going to go ahead and push it over the top there because we really want to elevate these. So at this point, you need to let them fully cool before you move on to trying to ice them. So that's like 2 hours, honestly. So, but we're fully cooled now, and we're moving on to the cream cheese icing. We've spread that nice and thick over the top of it. And then those nuts that we had reserved in the beginning, the chopped nuts, we're going to go ahead and spread them across the top, sprinkle them lightly and gently until they're as even as you can get them. And look, how beautiful is that? It looks more like a cake than it does brownies now, but there's a solution to that. That's right, our brownies are done. They're completely cool now. I put them in the refrigerator for another hour or two just because it makes it a lot easier to cut them when they're a little bit firmed up. And then you can bring them back to room temperature to serve them when you're ready. I also cut these into 16 brownies, which if you're using a good strong can of butter will be enough to have a pretty strong brownie to be one dose for one brownie. And then a couple of these just knocks me out. These are really strong, really good. And this is my favorite recipe, the toasted nuts in there, that just dark chocolate along with the flavor of the espresso, and then counterbalanced by the sweetness of that cream cheese icing and the nuts. It's amazing. You've got to try this little alteration on the box brownies that'll really elevate it. Make sure you check out infusedeats.com for this recipe and dozens more just like it. I hope you enjoyed this recipe for elevated brownies. If you did, please hit a like button and make sure you visit RuffHouseStudios.com for hundreds of cannabis culture videos made just for you. This is Matt from RuffHouse Studios. Thank you for watching.